All right, everyone, welcome. Let's get right into one of the biggest, oldest questions in all of psychology. What actually makes you, well, you?
Okay, so let's dive straight into the classic debate, right? Nature versus nurture. Is your personality, your intelligence, all that stuff, is it hardwired into your DNA from the moment you're conceived? Or is it all about how you were raised, the experiences you've had, the world you grew up in?
To even start to get a handle on that question, we've got to understand the fundamental building blocks. We have to begin with the nature side of things, your genes. I want you to think of your DNA as this huge, ancient cookbook. It's been passed down through your family for thousands and thousands of years. Now, a single gene, that's like one specific recipe in that book. It's a set of instructions for building one tiny part of you.
So you've got the recipe book, but how does the kitchen actually read it? Well, the DNA is the master blueprint. It creates a little messenger molecule called RNA. And that RNA takes the instructions from the DNA out into the cell and starts assembling proteins, which are the real building blocks of your body and your brain.
But here's the thing. Not all those recipes have the same pull. Some genes are dominant. They're like the head chef in the kitchen. Their instructions are going to be followed, period. Others are recessive. They're more like a quiet suggestion. Their trait will only show up if you get 2 copies of that recipe, one from each parent, with no loud dominant gene shouting over them.
Okay, so that's the basic biology. But how do scientists actually try to figure out how much of a behavior comes from the recipe itself versus, the kitchen it was all cooked in?
And this, right here, is the million-dollar question for researchers. I mean, from the second you exist, your genes and your environment are in this constant conversation. So trying to pull them apart is incredibly tricky. But they've come up with some really clever ways to try and listen in.
One of their most important tools is a concept called heritability. Now, we have to be super clear here. This does not mean how much of your personality is genetic. It's a statistic for a whole group of people. It tells us how much of the differences we see between people in a population can be chalked up to differences in their genes.
So the classic way to get at this is by studying twins. It's brilliant, really. Scientists compare identical twins, who are basically genetic copies of each other, to fraternal twins, who only share about half their genes, just like any brother or sister. So if identical twins are way more similar on a certain trait, say anxiety, than fraternal twins are, that's a pretty big clue that genes are playing a significant role. But, and this is a really important but, these studies aren't foolproof, not even close. For one thing, it's almost impossible to separate out the effects of the prenatal environment, what happens in the womb. And, as we're about to see, our genes can actually change our environment, which creates this messy feedback loop.
And this is where the story gets really fascinating. This is where we see that our genetic code isn't some rigid blueprint that locks us in. It's more like a first draft, and the environment is a very powerful editor. Genes are not destiny.
This quote says it all. It's one of the most important takeaways in this whole field. A trait can be highly heritable, meaning genes explain a lot of the variation in a population, and yet that same trait can be completely transformed by a change in the environment.
Let me give you an incredible, real-world example. A condition called PKU. It's 100% genetic. If a person with this gene eats a normal diet, they're almost guaranteed to develop a severe intellectual disability. It's a devastating outcome. But here's the magic. If you introduce one simple environmental change, a special diet that's low in this one amino acid, phenylalanine, right from birth, that genetic destiny is totally rewritten. The person develops a completely normal brain. It's an amazing testament to the power of nurture.
Now, that PKU example is pretty dramatic, but the environment interacts with our genes in a much more common, more subtle way every single day. It creates a kind of feedback loop. It's called the multiplier effect. And the basic idea is that a small genetic nudge in one direction can start a snowball rolling downhill. That tiny little tendency changes how you interact with the world and how the world interacts with you, which in turn makes that original tendency even stronger.
Think about it like this. Say a kid has a slight genetic gift for coordination, just a little bit. They're better at catching a ball than their friends. So a parent or a teacher notices, praises them, maybe encourages them to join a team. Because they're a little better, they enjoy it more, so they practice more. They get better coaching. And pretty soon, that tiny genetic starting point has been multiplied by the environment into a massive difference in skill.
Okay, so let's zoom the camera all the way out to the biggest picture possible. We've been talking about these genetic tendencies, but where did they even come from in the first place?
Well, the answer is evolution.
And the engine that drives evolution is natural selection. It's a surprisingly simple and logical process. Step 1, genes randomly mutate. Step 2, those genes get passed on. Step 3, if a gene happens to help an individual survive and, this is the really important part, reproduce more successfully, then, step 4, that gene gets passed on to more offspring, and over many generations, it becomes more common in the population.
So, what that means for us is that if we see a behavior that's super common in humans all around the world, it's a reasonable guess that it gave our ancestors some kind of reproductive edge. But, and please hear this is crucial, we can't just assume that. It's a hypothesis. It's something that has to be tested with actual research, not just taken for granted. So, let's wrap this all up. Let's come back to where we started, but now we're armed with a much more nuanced and, frankly, a much more interesting way of looking at ourselves.
The final answer is, the question was wrong all along. It's not a competition. It isn't nature versus nurture. It's nature and nurture. It's a constant, complicated, beautiful collaboration, a dynamic dance between your genetic potential and your life experiences that goes on for your entire life.
Look, if you remember anything from this, let it be these 3 points. First, genes give you a starting point, but your environment holds incredible power to shape the final outcome. Second, heritability is about differences in a population. It is not about your individual destiny, and it doesn't mean something is unchangeable. And third, genes work in complex ways, directly on your brain and indirectly by changing how the world sees you and reacts to you.
And that leaves us with a final thought, and it's a really empowering one. This isn't just science, it's about you. Your genetic code isn't a life sentence, it's a set of possibilities. So the real question becomes, what kind of environment can you build for yourself to unlock the potential you want to see? Thanks for joining me.